It's no secret in the royal family tree that the Windsors have had a pretty rough time of it in recent years. Scandals, controversies, and breakups seem to follow them wherever they go. But how did things get so bad? The answer is a lot like one of those horrible family photos you have with your relatives. You know, the ones where everyone looks miserable, and it seems like the photographer took particular pleasure in making sure the flash went off right as you were about to eat a spoonful of Aunt Gertrude's famous meat glaze. Things were a bit rocky for the royal family back in the 19th century, too. There were plenty of scandals then, which threatened to turn the public against the crown. And to make matters worse, Queen Victoria was beginning to think that her family wasn't up to snuff either. But she and her husband, Prince Albert, hatched a plan that would reshape the monarchy, turning it from an institution viewed by many as frivolous and out of touch into something more domestic and moral. What follows is a tale of love, duty, and the importance of family. So grab a handkerchief, dear viewer, because this is a tearjerker. Oh, hey, sorry. Just getting my wires crossed there for a second. Where was I? Oh yeah, let's do this thing. Meet Queen Victoria. That's right, the long-lived monarch who sat on the throne for 63 years and 7 months. She's been played by some iconic actors over the years, including a young and spry Shirley Temple in the 1937 film A Royal Scandal. And yes, we are aware that Shirley Temple was technically a child actress and not a young and spry adult. Nevertheless, she was 22 at the time of filming, so we thought we could get away with it. Victoria came to power in 1837. This put her at the height of the Industrial Revolution, a time when Britain was becoming increasingly industrialized, with innovations happening at a rapid pace and people flocking to cities for work. Unfortunately, though, the benefits of industrialization were not equally shared with the working class, who often lived in squalid conditions and worked grueling hours for little pay. Many turned to socialism as a way to fight for better working conditions and the vote. But the ruling class saw these burgeoning movements as a threat to their power and sought to stamp them out. Enter Queen Victoria. She believed firmly in the divine right of kings and saw the unrest as a challenge to her authority. So she enacted policies that made her more sympathetic to the plight of the poor and middle class, like funding hospitals and establishing public parks. That said, while she's often remembered as a champion of the common man, she also presided over a vast empire that profited greatly from colonialism. So we'll let you decide whether or not she deserves that title. At any rate, her reign saw the height of the British Empire, with its territorial holdings at their greatest extent and trade routes stretching around the globe. In spite of all that, though, Victoria wasn't feeling particularly fulfilled. That was because she felt her court lacked morality and decorum. Her ministers were embroiled in scandal after scandal, and her own family wasn't exactly upholding the values she held dear. Take her mother, for example, who was known for her wild spending and philandering ways. Then there was her uncle, King George IV, whose behavior was so egregious that Parliament passed a law barring him from marrying the woman he loved. It wasn't until he died that his younger brother Edward ascended to the throne and married the woman he'd chosen, only to have Parliament strip her of the title of princess, consort, and force their children to take their mother's last name instead of their father's. With a family tree like that, it's no wonder Victoria found herself longing for something more wholesome. And fortunately for her, there was someone who shared her desire for a more moral court, Prince Albert. They met for the first time in 1836 and were instantly smitten with each other. Victoria was drawn to Albert's intelligence and sensitivity, while Albert was captivated by Victoria's energy and determination. In fact, upon seeing her for the first time, he remarked that she was like a fairy tale princess. And we all know how much Victorians loved their fairy tales. But sadly, the relationship was somewhat complicated. See, Albert was the nephew of King George IV, the king that Parliament had forced his sister to leave behind at the altar. And considering the ill will between the royal families, many thought it best that the two not get together. Not to mention the fact that Victoria was 17 at the time, and Albert was only 15. But despite these obstacles, the pair began corresponding, and their bond only grew stronger. Soon they were sharing their hopes and dreams for the future, as well as their innermost thoughts and feelings. Albert poured his heart out to Victoria in letters, declaring his undying love and admiration for her. In one letter, he wrote, "My heart overflows with love for you. You are my whole existence, my all." And who can resist a good love letter like that? We certainly can't. Of course, as the son of a minor German duke, Albert knew that he could never marry Victoria unless he brought something to the table. So when he learned that his older brother had recently died, he began to see a glimmer of hope. If he could somehow convince his family to support him, he might just stand a chance, and convince them he did. With the help of his mother, he set about wooing the royal family, and they agreed to let him marry Victoria if she were willing. Fortunately for Albert, she was. The couple exchanged vows in a small ceremony in 1840 and were immediately smitten. They enjoyed a wonderful honeymoon at the Royal Lodge in Windsor Park and returned to London as the talk of the town. Their popularity with the public was immediate and widespread, in no small part due to the efforts of an enterprising journalist who whipped up the moniker Vicky and Bertie and used it to headline stories about the new royals. The press adored the couple, as did the masses, who saw them as a breath of fresh air in a world that was rapidly changing and becoming more complex. Albert was seen as a symbol of stability and tradition in a time of great upheaval, while Victoria was admired for her intelligence and determination. The newlyweds embarked on a series of highly publicized tours around Britain, which cemented their status as beloved figures across the realm. Victoria, ever the shrewd politician, understood the value of Albert's popularity and leaned into it, inviting him to join her on official duties and appearing in public with him as often as possible. The two were rarely seen without each other, and their devotion to each other was obvious for all to see. They also set about creating a more moral court as they had promised. Albert was a teetotaler, an animal rights activist, and he encouraged Victoria to adopt these causes as her own. Victoria obliged, though perhaps not always wholeheartedly. But both became patrons of the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, a role they took very seriously. Victoria even reportedly rescued a dog from a London streetcar after seeing it being mistreated by its owner. Meanwhile, Albert's influence could be seen in the arts, where he was a patron of the arts and sciences. He helped to establish the Royal College of Science and the National Gallery, and he was a major supporter of the British Museum. Albert also brought a sense of order and decorum to the royal court, which had been lacking in the years prior. He introduced accounting reforms and a new system of government that made the monarchy more efficient and less prone to scandal. Now, don't get us wrong, that doesn't mean things were perfect. Victoria and Albert's relationship was not without its own challenges. For starters, there was a 9-year age gap between the two, which may have contributed to some of the tension. After all, Albert often felt burdened by the responsibilities of his role in Victoria's strong personality sometimes clashed with his more reserved nature. But despite these obstacles, their love for each other remained steadfast. They navigated the challenges of their marriage with grace and dignity, relying on their shared faith and values to guide them through difficult times. And they proved that their marriage was a source of strength, not weakness, for the monarchy. It was said that their relationship inspired others around them to be better versions of themselves. The couple had 9 children together and raised them to be moral and responsible citizens. They instilled in their children the values of hard work, integrity, and compassion, which served them well throughout their lives. Tragedy struck in December of 1910 when Edward passed away. Albert succeeded him as king and took the royal name George. But his health was already in decline, and he died just 3 years later. In spite of everything he had accomplished during his relatively brief reign, George is largely remembered as a shy and awkward figure, which is unfortunate because he was actually quite brilliant and talented. Upon his death, Victoria was heartbroken. She and Albert had shared a deep bond, both personal and political, and his death left a void in her life that nothing could fill. She spent the final years of her long life mourning his passing, though she continued to fulfill her duties as monarch until her death in 1901. In the end, Albert and Victoria's legacy is one of love, duty, and service. They showed that it is possible for a royal marriage to be both passionate and platonic, and they proved that a monarchy can be more than just a figurehead. They made the monarchy more respectable and paved the way for future generations of royals to connect with the public in a more genuine way. So next time you find yourself groaning at the antics of the modern-day royals, just remember that it could have been a lot worse. They could have been living in a world where Aunt Gertrude's meat glaze was still on the menu.